Okay, another week, another wrap up. Things are heating up in the Mac space, which we'll get to in a moment. Andres, thanks for joining me.
Lovely to be here, Kyle. It's been a couple of weeks again since we last did
That's
this.
right. We missed a week, so I'm sure many people are glad we're back. We're back this week, so let's jump in. There's three interesting stories. Let's start with Sitecore and front end as a service. What they're doing with front end as a service right now.
Yeah, so I'm calling this one the front end as a service resurgence. So these two stories were featured in our latest edition of the DXP Report. First being Sitecore reveals new component capability to its Experience Manager Cloud platform. So Sitecore XM Clouds, they're like modern CMS. And they've just launched XM Cloud Components, which is a front end as a service composer for marketers to create their brand's digital style guide and build visual components. These components can be created from scratch, or they can be styled by importing existing HTML. You can map data sources to components to enable dynamic and responsive components that can be reused across digital properties, as well as to save time and create brand consistency. And it allows content authors, UX designers, marketers to work in parallel so they can speed up the process when creating digital experiences. Some other interesting things that Sitecore mentioned in this press release were the fact that they signed 20 new clients to XM Cloud since Sitecore Sim in October. And they've also added new features to Sitecore Search, Sitecore Connect, Content Hub One, and things like that. So yeah, this is Sitecore adding front end as a service to their CMS offering, essentially.
Yeah, this is another good move for Sitecore in their grand scheme of things, which is pivoting to composability, pivoting to Mac, which is maybe a bit of a controversial thing to say right now, which we'll get to in a moment. For them, this makes a ton of sense. You and me have been sort of tracking this front end as a service trend over the last year and a half, and of course, no code has been something that's sort of been a trend even before that. So it makes a lot of sense for Sitecore, but as we've mentioned before, every step Sitecore takes in this direction of composability and Mac is like another sleepless night for their agency partners, right? The system integrators, because they themselves are seeing the writing on the wall with Sitecore in the direction it's going, and the direction it's going is not where it has been for the last 10 years or plus. So that's concerning for the agencies, and at the same time, of course, they've got customers, big customers, who are like neck deep in Sitecore's legacy products, right? Some of them are in the middle of migrating hundreds of websites into the products that Sitecore seems to be, leaving high and dry, if you will. So it's a very nervy time for the agencies. They're not sure how to handle that. They're not sure what to tell their customers at this point, and how to best handle this massive pivot essentially that Sitecore's exploring right now. But nevertheless, this is good news for Sitecore as in the grand scheme of things in the long term. I think this is something they need to do. There'll be some bumps, there'll be some issues with how agencies react, but I think it's good news for them in the long term for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And another story featured that kind of also mentioned the cold front end as a service phenomenon is Elastic Path. They acquired Unstack, the goal of empowering merchandisers with blazing fast, no code front end. So Elastic Path, they're a composable commerce vendor. It used to be headless commerce, but they've kind of like made that tweak to kind of be more encompassing on the entire composable commerce phenomenon. And Unstack, they're a fully hosted front end as a service product, enabling business teams and digital agencies to rapidly design and launch personalized shopping landing pages and component-based front ends. And they also have some additional features like one-click integrations with tools like Shopify, Google Analytics, Segment, Salesforce, and they offer no-code visual editing, so empowering business teams again. Here's something that James Driscoll, the CEO of Elastic mentioned. Composable commerce has undeniable benefits, but it also comes with an added complexity that many customers are left to manage on their own. We're committed to making it easier for brands to confidently embrace composable commerce, so showcased through our recent release of Integration Sub, and today with the acquisition of Unstack. Together with Unstack, we can provide customers with a commerce-ready front-end solution to launch unique shopping experiences. So it seems like more embracing the front end as a service phenomenon.
yeah, this is more front of the service news, and Elastic Path being yet another company who is embracing this very, very seriously. And the one-click integrations with Shopify, Klaviyo, so on and so forth. This again harkens back to when we were discussing the increasing need for not just like legacy players who are trying to become composable, but also just the composable players who've always been composable. There's a greater need now for more of these quick integrations, one-click integrations, partnerships across the spectrum. If Mac and composable is really going to catch on as like the way to build in the future, which I think it is, there's going to need to be more of these one-click integrations, more of these sort of almost like Zapier-like automations maybe you could set up where there's just so much interoperability going on that it just makes sense. It doesn't become, it's no longer a hurdle, right? Because as James Driscoll said, what did he say? It comes with an added layer of complexity that many customers live to manage on their own. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That needs to be managed for the customer, right? You need to be able to say, as Elastic Path, we've got 30 is a great start. Ideally, we've got 60, 90, 100 one-click integrations where your existing legacy platforms or just platforms you're using already are part of that, but also at the same time, if you're using an email platform or a CRM, for example, your existing CRM is part of our one-click integration ecosystem, but we've also got 7 more there if you want to explore other options. It's very, very easy to pick and choose, and that's really embracing the DXP, the composability aspect. And the more this kind of thing happens, the more we have these very quick and easy integrations that are sort of handled for the customer, the better. But yeah, interesting. Just more front end as a service stuff happening, I guess.
Yeah, and just picking up from what you mentioned, what I think is interesting that's happening is so Sitecore, like as I mentioned, they doubled down on their shift to composability. But what I think is interesting is kind of, and I feel like we're in a new stage of like the headless digital experience composition, what have you, space, where there's now even more terminology and understandable terminology coming into play. So even when we talk about like composability, Gartner and a lot of upcoming vendors, they started shifting away from just calling themselves composable to maybe focus on digital experience composition, which talks about like basically that need to make it easier for business users and whoever else to kind of orchestrate all those different components, all those plugins and integrations, kind of pull them all together and make it easier for anyone adopting composable commerce, what have you, to get off the ground and keep things operational. What I think is interesting is that like just a definition of what the Elastic Path and Unstack front end as a service supposed to offer, and then Sitecore's front end as a service supposed to offer. Basically, for a digital experience composition, there's supposed to be 3 components. Front end as a service, which ideally should be geared towards developers, is basically like the low code builder, right, to make it easier for them to pull and all their like headless components together. The experience builder, which is what should be geared towards the marketers, that's focused on making it easier for them to create digital experiences all they need to. And then the API integration layer, which is basically like make all those integrations with those different components and whatnot. I think the problem that we're trying to solve is pretty clear now. I think what we have to get to, hopefully sometime this year, maybe next year, with a lot more clarity on it, is what each thing is supposed to do. Because if I looked at what Gartner said front end as a service is, and then looked at what these guys said their front end as a service is, or even what we generally understand front end as a service to be, it's like, is that really what front end as a service is? Like, I get the problem is meant to solve, but when we start throwing all these terms out there, like there's got to be a lot more clarity on what each is, So I think that's like the next stage that needs to be handled with that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think this is something that's happened like over the years, right? Since I've
Yeah.
been like involved in the CLS space, Gartner will come up with, sometimes not Gartner, but usually is an acronym or a word or a phrase, and they will define it. But then, one or two vendors will come along and adopt it, but they'll define it slightly differently, obviously in a way that fits their roadmap, in a way that fits what they have currently. So that's sort of, they'll massage it a little bit, and then it's like, okay, well, what did DXP mean? What did head of CMS mean? What did you mean when you said that? And it's actually like people using these terminologies. There's actually 2 or 3 definitions out there, that you could subscribe to, and everybody's right at the same time, but also everybody's kind of
Yeah,
not right.
exactly.
And it wouldn't surprise me. It would not surprise me at all if that happens here with front as a service, because it can again be massaged in a way where, hey, our product, oh, we already had that, right? We already had front. We've always been front as a service. We've had that for years, and we could do that now. So it's definitely going to happen. It always has happened. That's why I try not to take these acronyms and these phrases too seriously in and of themselves, and just look at what they're solving, right? So as you mentioned, this is very much marketer friendly features, right? We sort of crossed that turning point, if you will, where the head of CMS space and the composable software space was very much focused on making the developer experience more free, easier, less constrained to certain frameworks. We sort of passed that now, and now it's like, okay, how can we get marketers back involved as much as possible without, again, hindering the developers and making developers sort of slow down to help the marketers, if you will. So that's what's happening. The acronyms that are being used to describe it are less important. But yeah, yeah. This will happen for sure. The massaging of the acronyms will definitely happen. But I agree with everything you said. Okay, what's our last? Okay, last story is an interesting one. So this links to our first story. Sitecore continuing to move down the Mac/composability avenue. The Mac Alliance have published a blog post, 4 things digital leaders really need to know. Why don't you take it away with like a quick summary of what they're upset about, if you will? What is the Mac Alliance trying to get across in this blog post?
Yeah. So the main thing that they want to get across is 4 things digital leaders need to know about Mac and Composable, but never dare to ask. As like, we don't know what we don't know. Why Mac, not just Composable matters. So the main premise they're trying to get across is the fact that, hey, you don't just need Composable, and this is definitely coming in response to the fact that like vendors such as Sitecore and others, they've been adopting Composable as what they're calling themselves and how they want to be viewed by customers. But that's pretty much what the Mac Alliance was formed for in the first place. Like they were like, okay, what these vendors here are doing isn't really the perfect option for enterprises today. It's a bit outdated. It needs to be tweaked. It needs to be more modern and encompass these things. So the premise I want to get across is Mac and Composable aren't the same thing. So composability, as I mentioned, is the ability to break down complex systems into modular components. Specifically, with the following characteristics: orchestration, you have to be able to coordinate and manage the interaction between the components. Discoverability, the components have to be able to locate and access and reuse easily. Autonomy, components that can function independently of each other. Modularity, components that can be combined in different ways to create different applications or services. And Mac's an acronym, stands for microservices, API first, cloud native, SaaS, and headless. So key thing they want to mention is that all software that is Mac certified is also composable, but not all composable software follows Mac principles. So they kind of outline 4 areas where there's these distinctions happen. So first thing that's not Mac is on-premise deployment. So if you buy software, you install it, operate in a physical location, usually like someone's premise on premises, and you're not able to get the benefits of cloud, like lack scalability, like the upgrades handled by the cloud service provider or the vendor provider, then that's not Mac. That's on-premise. That doesn't fit the cloud characteristic. Something that's often on Mac is single tenancy offerings. So that means that software and database infrastructure serves a single customer, and then other database infrastructure, other underlying services are not shared with other customers of the same vendor. In contrast, multi-tenancy means that all customers with vendors share common infrastructure components. There are some Mac vendors that offer single tenancy for certain offerings. So if you're like in a highly regulated industry like finance or maybe government enterprises and things like that, will want something single tenancy, even if they use like a Mac vendor. Then there's 2 other areas which I think are the key differences. So version APIs. So this would say so not Mac. So continuously adding new functionality and upgrade-free delivery. Upgrade-free delivery is the hallmark of cloud-native SaaS. But there's an additional layer called the API layer, application performance interface versioning. In Mac certified vendors, technology buyers can ensure that the programmatic layers are also not versioned. So this means that when developers use the APIs to create new functionality or automate processes across the environment, they can be sure that it's consistent and stable across all interfaces. When you compose a style with version APIs, you put the burden of staying on top of the vendor releases and implications of their usage onto the internal development team. So that's significant maintenance and overhead and risk for breaking connectivity and consequently downtime. So basically you have to, when like, I think this is one area where they really focus on what Sitecore is doing, for instance, Sitecore was doing, for instance, where it's like you always have to be upgrading to the latest version because another version is going out of date and you need to upgrade. And if you don't upgrade everything, then you're out of connectivity. The other part is monolithic deployment models. So a monolithic deployment model means that I have to deploy the entire application as one large deployment. With automatic deployment model, the individual components can be deployed atomically. Brands can only deploy the components needed for the new launch. And the main business impact lies in the cost of change because having to apply the entire application takes more time, leaves more room for failure, and creates substantial operational overhead, storage, and bandwidth. In a mock deployment world, brands release new code to the digital experience multiple times a day. So with its monolithic, these deployments are harder to do, and it's additional architectural burden. So I think maybe I could what I infer from that is basically if you're thinking about like Sitecore's latest update, like if it's not completely mocked, you can't just update that one portion of it. You can't just update that one portion of that application to just add those new features if you're already running Sitecore. You basically have to redo the entire application. Whereas since Sitecore has gone composable and they've kind of broken down those different applications, you don't necessarily have to get a full suite, but it's not quite mocked because you still need to go through like almost a monolithic deployment or installation upgrade whenever you want to use it.
Yeah, that was a great summary. Well done. You had a lot to cover there. You covered it very well. Um, the last two, like you mentioned, the last two are like the main. I feel like the main battleground: the versioned APIs and the monolithic deployment models. Those are the two that are like really setting things apart right now. But I feel like Cycle's kind. I feel like, and I'll say we'll say Cycle, but also Salesforce are part of this, right, for sure. So let me set the scene here, because Mac Alliance has sort of set this scene, right? I'm gonna read a paragraph from the blog post. The question and the confusion is not surprising, given that Mac washing is real and the big legacy super vendors of digital experience technology continue to associate themselves with the Mac terminology to imply association with the future of technology. The deliberate and intended confusion has the potential of camouflaging shortcomings of legacy software and ultimately ensures continuing sale of the same. That's like it's kind of like that's bold, right? Like they read the Mac washing. That's very bold, and it's not a surprise that the Mac Alliance and when Sitecore and Salesforce started using these terminologies and pivoting this way, they were always on a collision course. But I feel like now like they've collided, right? They've sort of officially collided now. So Sitecore, as we mentioned earlier, they're sort of on this journey. They've invested lots and lots of money into acquiring platforms so they can go down this composable path, if you will. Salesforce using terminology like composable storefront, composable cloud. So in a way, I totally see where Mac Alliance is coming from, right? I do see it, and I do agree with the differences, right? The differences are very clear. I have a feeling that Sitecore and Salesforce are probably aware of it and are like running at full speed. And full speed may take 2 years, 3 years, but they're running at full speed to have maybe it's like a walled off section of their offering that is Mac, right? And I think they're trying to get that, right? So the legacy stuff may be there for a long time, but I feel like they're going to have something at some point where it's like, hey, we're just as Mac as you guys, right? Because this sort of walled off section of our offering, you can't say it's not Mac, right? It ticks all the check boxes. So I feel like what Mac Alliance need to do here is make it abundantly clear. So what this blog post did is it made it clear what the differences are between the two. But I feel like those last 2 points, the benefits of having non-versioned APIs and a microservice deployment model, that needs to be like those two things need to be all they talk about, right? Because those are the two things that Sitecore and Salesforce are going to struggle the most to sort of to qualify for, if you will. So I feel like that needs to be where the battle is won for the Mac Alliance. it's just interesting to me to see to know that I'm sure Sitecore and Salesforce are well aware of this and are working hard to like nullify that argument. But until then, the Mac Alliance should be very, very bullish on those 2 points specifically, I think. But it's interesting times. Interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. And like one thing I will mention, because like I think the other thing we do have to think of is that even though like we think of like Sitecore and as Salesforce or whatever, there are also other CMSs, custom CMSs, more legacy CMSs that probably don't even have much like headless functionality or whatever. That both of these vendor categories are trying to compete against, because both these vendor categories, they've still been pushing headless and whatnot. So they're still kind of competing against like completely legacy offerings that really haven't adapted. They're just like, hey, you need your CMS to manage content and do all the other things that we offer. Like that's what it's gonna do. So like, but like there's a lot of companies still battling that. I think the couple weeks back we featured like the Mac Alliance report on like the legacy versus stuff like that. And I didn't fully read the report to see what they categorize as legacy, or what a Sitecore could be included in that. But I get the feeling that it might not be, or that might not tell the entire picture of who both these groups are battling against, because the notion, as you mentioned, of the on-premises versus cloud and single tenant versus multi-tenant, I feel like that's a bridge that's already been crossed. Like what in terms of like throw the space, it's
Yeah,
definitely like the last bit that needs to figure out.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, bit of a longer episode than usual, but I feel like it was warranted this time. So we'll be keeping tabs on this collision that's happened and will continue to happen, I'm sure. Um, and anybody listening, if you're not subscribed to the DXP Report newsletter, that's where you will be able to keep tabs along with us. But otherwise, me and Andres will hopefully be back next week with some new juicy gossip to discuss. Andres, thanks for your time.